Good evening. It's been 2 weeks since I said I wanted to keep a bit of a video diary mostly to talk about my progress with the psionics. And in that time, I've finished the entire first draft. So just to go over and things I touched on, the just going down the documents, 37 pages, 36 36 pages. So I've been cramming in the last 2 weeks, always double checking against published power level. I i would say it's a little above, the subclasses might be a little above things from the player's handbook, but pretty much everything published after the player's handbook is a higher power level. So I'm not too worried. I think I kept it in line with everything else, which is always the hardest thing. I think when you're making a larger project, it's always difficult to keep everything at the good level. When you make just a subclass, there's not too much, but when you're making, in this case, three whole classes, it's really pain. So, just going down the document, the first page is the Esper. They are half manifestors. They lean more into skill proficiencies, and their subclasses are based around their skills. They have the augment die. It's a pool of dice equal to their intelligence modifier, short rest, refill, and they can add it to things from their subclass affiliated skills to add to that, and it gives that, and they also have additional things to use them for. But ultimately, they are trained half manifestors. They take a bit after the rogue, but with no sneak attack, just expertise, the ability to do things as a bonus action, skill intensive. Four subclasses: the Lurk, which is pretty pure rogue, focused on acrobatics, sleight of hand, and stealth. They can spend their augment dice to do what is basically a weaker sneak attack. They have the Marauder, which is a little more combat focused for direct combat instead of sneaking around. The Rake is social. The Snoop is intelligence based for insight and investigations. Before I settled on the Esper name, originally I was looking for something that was synonymous with a gumshoe, if that made sense, because the Snoop was exactly what I wanted it to end up being in the end. You are a psionic investigator. They have the inner conduit feature, which affects so many of their abilities. It's all meant to really keep things open and balanced against itself. The Psychic hasn't really gotten any touches from when I last said it. It's got 5 subclasses, 4 in the Esper, and 3 in the Wilder. So in the 2 weeks, it's 3 full classes, 12 subclasses total. The Wilder is a child of their own trauma. They are the only charisma based psionic caster. They are releasing power in an uncontrollable way, as shown by their primary feature, which is the Wild Surge. So all psionics have like a strain limit, the number of psi points they can spend in an entire round before, well, at all. I haven't really put anything into the feature for surpassing that, except for the Wild Surge, which is when you're channeling this one power, you can spend your Wild Surge and you just don't care about your strain limit. You take a penalty for a very short time afterwards, but ultimately all the subclasses have a feature at 10, halfway through the progression, to give you an additional bonus after your Wild Surge, and the base class has a feature at 7 that does that. Because the Wilder from 3.5 had the whole Euphoria thing after their strain, and I wanted to keep a lot of that spirit, despite the fact I had to update it into 5e structure. I have 3 here. The Haunted one, which is more about not just stealth, but like illusions and poltergeist behavior, throwing things around without having to touch them. The Cenobite, who has a link to an aberration in their soul, and the Damaged one, which is a name I'm so to improve, which is focused on putting out damage because they have this traumatic past that broke open their psionic ability before they were able to learn to use it properly, like a psychic. Multi-class in rules, 3 feats. One is essentially just Magic Initiate for Scions. War Magic for Scions. And I don't really have a joke for this one. It is just... No, it was... There's a feat in 3.5 for a Burrow in Power, which I adapted up in order to meet how half feats work now. I built out how Manifesting works to make it essentially like no material, like no component spellcasting. You still have to obey your strain limit, which puts a real incentive on using lower cost abilities more often. But because there's no Vancian slots and you have a number of points to spend, then you're really incentivized. Like, the whole system wants you to do smaller things more, while you can save up the big bomb for when you need it. To maybe not symbolize, but to lean into the idea that these are things you are, like, your mind can just do, but if you have to strain yourself, then, like, it puts the entire situation into a heavier scope. A lot of psionic, like, representation also leans into that, with small powers you can do all the time. And I really leaned into that because of how often you have to sustain a lot of these expressions. Sustain works like concentration, but for your inner conduit, and with that, it turns a whole lot into keeping this one power on for as long as possible. Because it's linked to keeping your inner conduit open, it then turns into less powers more often, and once you have something sustained, you can keep it going until you take damage one way or another. I went through the Expanded Psionic's Handbook from 3.5. I adapted about 100, I think. I lost count when I was going through the first time. About 100 different expressions are here, which really fluffs us up from 15 pages for the class. 14 pages for the 3 classes, the 3 feats, and the multi-classing rules, to bring us to like the 35 pages of content plus the title page. Most of these have a sustainability, others you can just cast. Sustain lasts unless otherwise stated. As long as you're sustaining it, you can stop at any time, just like concentration, but then it doesn't have a maximum duration. Some things are a little different, like dismissal, which is the psionic version of banishment, has a maximum time on it because you don't need to go longer than that. But most of these other things you kind of like spend the points on and you can just keep it going for a long time. The lesser important details, like just a one-off instant ability or an ability that doesn't require being sustained, you can go while you're sustaining, and just like concentration and instantaneous spells. And the other thing is they all have display abilities, which are they create the 4 main ones, 5 total, but 4 that show up often are it creates a visual thing, like how all spells create a visual stimulus unless otherwise stated. They'll create like a visual sign of something happening. They'll make a sound, or they could create a material thing to interact with. But materials are susceptible to dissipate, which is essentially dispel magic for psionics, which breaks up the astral fog that you've created and sends it back to the ethereal plane. Unlike magic, which creates physical things, all psionics either uses the body or summons astral fog in any of the 6 orders, but primarily meta-creative expressions are drawing out the fog of the astral plane, crystallizing it, and exploiting it for use. Clairsentience is simply using the mind to experience things that you otherwise wouldn't. Psychometabolism is enhancing your body. Psychomotion is teleportation or movement abilities. Telekinesis is moving things in the physical world with your mind. And telepathy, which is mind-to-mind contact. The 3 classes have subclasses, all have spell lists all laid out, and all the spells are cut up into their orders. Unlike wizards, who have like a clear incentive into their spell schools in the player's handbook, I didn't want to do that with the psionic disciplines for the psychic, because I didn't want to try to limit the abilities that you could put your character on. I have the first draft here in front of me, very, very long, and I'm going over it. I'll have like a full release at some point in the near future, but ultimately I wanted to mostly just take a few days to relax and let my brain kind of defrag. I'll look at this with fresh eyes in a few days. I just wanted to keep you guys up to date on everything. Again, mostly for my own accountability, but also maybe someone will see this and they'll want to play a Psion. We all know the Mystic UA isn't playable, but I I do love to hear other people play with the things I make. So have a wonderful night, and if you celebrate it, I hope you had a happy Easter.